Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Know It Don't podcast. This is a podcast where college students can tell me about things they're learning in their class. Really, it's just the goal of this podcast is just to have a conversation where they can talk about anything. Conversation about anything that they think they can confidently explain because, after all, they know it. I don't. Our guest today, Brady Chanpong. He's a political science pre-law major here at Oklahoma State University. Is that what you'd say? No?
Yeah, I mean, political science pre-law.
That's okay.
It's more so just the pre-law.
Oh.
That doesn't really.
No, what? Does I am. Yeah, no, we're rolling. We're rolling.
Sweet, cool.
Let me write that down for next week. Tell them when we're rolling.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, wow, that sounds like a really good intro.
Thank you.
Like it was thought out. And
Thank you.
Meaningful.
Thank you.
Too bad it's not the actual one we're doing.
I rehearsed it in the bathroom. Political science pre-law. And what do you want? Really, again, there's no structure to this podcast. I want to talk to people about things that they know about.
Well, I mean, oh God, there's so many different things that we could talk about, but I'm afraid most of them are going to be boring. I'm looking at notes that I have from classes that I threw together rather quickly, and I think maybe the most interesting I could talk about is administrative agencies, which is inherently boring, but I was told I could talk about anything, and that's what I like, so
Certainly.
It sucks.
Certainly. Okay, administrative agencies.
Yes.
What is an administrative agency?
An administrative agency, the things that essentially, unknown to you, are they run your life, federal, state, or even local level. If I remember correctly, and by remember I mean check my notes, no one really knows just how many administrative agencies there are at the federal level. In the state of Oklahoma, I believe there's a couple hundred, but their functions range anywhere from, simply, day-to-day management, taxation, whatever it can be, there's an administrative agency for it. And that's kind of the, what's the word? It's kind of the issue that a lot of people take with them is we don't know how many there are. Of course, at the state level, it's easier to kind of calculate. But we also don't know how much they're spending exactly or how the money that they're being given is being spent, whether appropriately or inappropriately.
Right. So, okay. Is there an administrative agency that's in charge of budget and sort of financing?
There is.
So how does that administrative agency not know how many administrative agencies there are?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm sure the number exists somewhere, but according to my wonderful professors, in particular, until recently, the Deputy General Counsel for Oklahoma State University, Dr. Michael Scott Fern, I absolutely love him, that number is unknown. I would assume the Office of Budget Management would know, but yeah. For most everyday Americans, it's an unknown.
Right.
And I would assume if you ask, any of your elected officials, they probably wouldn't know either. They just approve the funding.
Right. Gosh. Okay. So administrative agencies, they kind of run everything. Yes. I mean, that's anything that the government would be handling. There's an administrative agency for it.
No, yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean, so you have the Office of Management and Budget. There's a Congressional Budget Office. Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, the Interior, Commerce, Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, the list goes on. And those are just, the main heads within, the executive cabinet that's elected by the president, or not elected, nominated by the president, approved. But, within each of those agencies exists, sub-agencies that specialize with one thing or another, depending on what the agency actually does. And that's where it gets foggy. That's where it gets cloudy and difficult for people to kind of wrap their head around.
Right, because it just branches and branches and branches and branches.
It keeps splitting off.
Did you guys talk about any sort of like how the reporting goes in that chain of command? Like if you're at a lower branch level,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't imagine having to report then to people really, really high. Like, that just seems like such a long.
That's another part of the difficulty is, a lot of decisions that are being made within these agencies, they don't always make their way to the top. Some stuff either, it gets lost in translation, or it's mistranslated, or it's intentionally left out. So there's definitely, there are a lot of different ethical dilemmas, I'd say, because the whatever secretary of X, Y, and Z department, they're not going to know everything that goes on. The chain of command, as you would call it, exists, yes, but is it always going to be adhered to? Not entirely.
Right. And I mean, I'm sure that's by design. I assume that's the point of having sub-agents.
Oh yeah, no, there's flexibility with it.
You can't have them go all the way up.
Plausible deniability.
Right. Right. What's the minimum amount of people required to call something an agency?
Oh, golly.
Because I assume that there's other words like agency. Like, I'm going to use team here, but whatever label they put on it. That at what point does it become an actual official agency that we don't count?
I think. Oh God, one of the smaller independent administrative agencies within the executive branch, if I'm remembering correctly, is the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. And if you can guess how many employees, I'll say, exist within that agency, I will be very surprised. Would you like to take a guess? Rough range. How about that? That's probably easier.
All right. I don't want to do the thing where I guess way too low or way too high. I feel like a small number for an agency would be 20 or so.
That's a pretty good guess, I would say. Is that the guess, or is that...
Sure. I can give it a plus minus 5, 15 to 25-ish.
So actually, they have roughly about 270-ish. That's as of 2017. But
I see.
Yeah, they are the agency, I guess you can call them, that handles the retirement of federal employees and just kind of processing that in the different stages. But yeah.
Interesting. 270
people.
And that's a smaller one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the interesting part is we don't know who they are. They're just people. They just exist. And, well, I say that kind of facetiously, because most of these people, we put in the whoever the secretary of the, I guess, head of the agency would be, and then the people below them, you have your deputy or assistant head or whatever. But below that, it's just kind of, it's murky. They're nameless people in gray suits that kind of walk around and spend your money how they want. I say that, but that's kind of the ethical question about it is, we as citizens don't have, I guess, a direct say in how that money is being spent. And that's, one side of the argument. The other side is they're experts in what they're doing. They probably know better than anyone else as to how that money should be spent, or they have established positions within these agencies that, who's going to question it?
Right.
If we've been doing okay for X, Y, and Z number of years, then we're fine in these hands.
I want to ask some statistics that I really wouldn't expect you to know.
I don't. I promise.
That's fine. Then just guess for me, honestly. But what percentage of government officials would you say are elected versus appointed? Because you talked about how it's we don't have a say in these and I mean, you can say that, we elect the people and the elected people appoint people, right? But
yeah,
what percentage of all of these government officials, these federal employees, are actually elected where we are, that person gets to stay, and then we just have to trust them with the remaining percentage?
Mm-hmm. Now, you say in the government, do you mean just the executive in regards to agencies?
I guess I mean anybody that works in an agency, and I suppose the legislators wouldn't necessarily would.
I mean, I wouldn't count the legislators. I mean, you could, but if we're just talking about federal administrative agencies, not state, not local, nothing of the sort, really, aside from, probably from the heads of the agencies who are actually sitting members in the president's cabinet and their deputies, probably not a huge percentage. Maybe 20%, maybe
20% elected.
Yeah. And by elected, well,
that's where it gets tricky, I guess, with my own understanding of the subject. Is I was kind of just thinking about legislators as well, and so.
I'm thinking, you elect them, or my thought process is this: you elect the president, they put their names forward, kind of as a will of the people sort of thing, and then those people are approved by the Senate.
Right.
So that, in my eyes, is they're elected.
Sure.
The senators are the representatives from the states. They, in a perfect world, would be voting how the citizens of their state would vote. But that's another topic for another episode. God, I feel like I'm coming across as incredibly opinionated on this. I'm really not.
Well, I feel like it is maybe really hard to be opinionated on the existence of government agencies.
Yeah.
But okay, so we don't know how many. Is there? You said there was. What was the rough estimate for Oklahoma? How many government agencies?
Oh, a couple hundred, maybe.
Couple hundred. So, and Oklahoma's a pretty small state.
Yeah.
Like, how many would you say California has?
Oh gosh, and
would they have?
Well, a lot of them would be similar in role.
Would California maybe have more, just being a blue state versus Oklahoma being a red state? Would that have an impact on?
I would imagine so, based on kind of differing ideologies in the role of government in the lives of the citizenry. Excuse me. Well, think about it this way: at the federal level, in the executive branch, there are 15 executive departments in total. So that's 15 heads. Those are 15 people that, as we kind of previously defined as elected, I say in quotes. But in California, that could be larger, because they might have different departments for different aspects of everyday life in California. But I'm not entirely sure.
Now, how many of these agencies are actually, just bear with me, I suppose, on my phrasing, but how many of these agencies are actually making policy? In other words, like, I know a good chunk of them are probably just sort of going through processes. Like the one you said that was kind of small was like retirement of, like, they're just kind of going through paperwork. It's like probably a lot of them, but how many of them are actually doing things that would day to day be more likely to affect you and me?
A lot of them. So this is relevant, for the past 2.5 years. We've been living through COVID. Recently, I don't remember the actual name of the case, but it was decided about, week and a half, 2 weeks ago. The actual decision in its entirety has not been illustrated on the U.S. Reporter, but the Department of Health and Human Services passed. God, this is going to bother me if I can't remember the actual name of it. But their secretary exercised power in implementing a final rule on the mandating of vaccinations for federal employees in the Department of Health and Human Services. Excuse me. This went to court because a case that had actually been decided, I think, the week prior. And I feel bad, I can't remember the names of these. I should. I wrote 11 pages on them. um, it was kind of dictating the necessity of vaccination for businesses with over 100 employees. That was ruled to be, kind of a overreach of power, and that rule was, I guess, nullified.
Well, and was that the Supreme Court that said that? Or
That was, yes.
Okay.
But then that following week, Chief Justice Chief Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Kavanaugh. Yeah.
What a world that would be.
Man, what a world. And Justice Kavanaugh, the two of them sided with the court's liberal minority in actually, ruling in favor of the secretary in his, I guess, exercise of power, because they found that in the actual legislation that granted the Department of Health and Human Services and OSHA, actually, their power and within their mission statement, that was decided to be completely within their scope, because if they're protecting their employees, they are, I guess, directly protecting the people they're serving. I don't remember why I went on that tangent.
No, that's fine. This is interesting.
There was a reason.
Well, no, this is interesting. So, okay. Well, yes.
No, I remember. The kind of the scary thing about administrative agencies, and I say scary, it's interesting to see it operate in the executive branch, is each agency has the capacity to write legislation, vote on legislation, approve and kind of review it all, as the three branches of the federal government would. So they are judge, jury, and executioner of any law that they want, because they have the ability to pass laws and apply them to nearly any aspect of life in America. And they don't face nearly the same amount of resistance that you would in, two-party Congress or something.
Resistance or scrutiny, I'm sure. Like they really.
No, really.
Okay, but well, hold on though. This secretary story is interesting to me.
Let's see if I can find it real quick.
Sure. Let me just clarify, make sure I get sort of the sequence of events. So, okay. So, Supreme Court strikes down vaccine mandate for businesses, right? Maybe that's an oversimplification, but whatever. Okay, so Supreme Court does that. The next week, this case comes before the Supreme Court again?
Yes.
Okay. So, it's about, because I thought that, and maybe this was the case, but for some reason I thought it was attached to the first one, but where they said that federal employees could, federal employers, I don't know if that's the word, could require vaccination for the federal employees. Was that not part of that first ruling? And did that have to be decided by this second ruling? Because I do remember some sort of notification.
No, I know what
that
you're
was
talking
like
about.
They struck it down, but they allow it to remain in place for federal employees.
Yeah.
Or nope, it was healthcare workers.
Yeah, healthcare.
That's what it was.
Phone's ringing. So I did find it. I just went and looked at my notes. It was Joseph R. Biden Jr. Versus the state of Missouri, and it was, let's see. So the rule was issued on November 5th, 2021 by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And then let's see when it was actually decided, because this is completely recent. It's very, very recent. Let's see. Oh, I didn't actually write the date in here. Oh, that's a problem. I guess that's points off. That's fine. Yeah, but I know what you're talking about.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying though is that this secretary decided to kind of try and exercise the same amount of power that a CEO of a company, right? Because the Supreme Court said that the government couldn't require companies to require vaccination, right? But a company still could, right? They're a private corporation. They could say, hey, we need all our employees to be vaccinated, right? So this secretary of this agency was essentially saying like, hey, all of my employees, quote unquote, need to be vaccinated, right? It's sort of CEO power, more or less, maybe.
In a sense, I'm not entirely sure what the motivation behind it was. I'm not Secretary Bakara, but is that how you say it? I think it is. But so I'll read you the I'll read you kind of the agency's I guess where his underlying authority to do so to implement this rule, this final rule, kind of stems from. So the authority to issue the rule as a final rule, rather than through the typical notice comment procedure, comes directly from Congress. Congress authorized the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to impose conditions on the receipt of Medicaid and Medicare funds that the Secretary finds necessary in the interest of health and safety of individuals who are furnished services. Then you get, 42 USC, section 139.5, blah, blah, blah. Not important. But the Secretary stated that he believed that any further delay could endanger patient health and safety given the spread of the Delta variant, dominant variant at the time. Now we got Omicron. So his rationale was, if I can mandate in another sense, for, to ensure that no, what's the word? Well, really to limit, future harm that is entirely within my scope.
So this is what he decided, sort of.
Essentially, and the court, well, it was a split decision, but they did decide that was entirely valid.
Interesting. Okay, so wait, what was the deal with the Medicaid, though? Explain that to me.
Oh, no, that's just like
They
can impose conditions for this is prior. This is kind of, it supported his rationale, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure how. But he can impose conditions on the receipt of Medicaid and Medicare funds.
I see. And so this was on like people that working within his agency, or this is like
within his agency.
Okay.
That were treating people.
Okay.
Or that would have a hand in, I guess, in some way, shape, or form treating people.
So it doesn't necessarily apply to you and me, like in that regard, right? Or does it? Like,
No. I mean, unless you have a side job as a member of the Department of Health and Human Services, which, I mean, good for you.
I've been waiting to tell you.
God, I wish. No, but it's not a mandate on healthcare workers, as I understand it, or employees in corporations. It is simply employees within the agency. Now,
Right.
some of them could be healthcare workers, but this is kind of one of those little loopholes that you can find scattered throughout any sort of U.S. code or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, here's another percentage I would be curious of. What percentage of Americans, right, of the 300 whatever million people that live in America, what percentage do actually work for the government?
Oh, God. Oh.
Because with all these agencies and all of these tiny tasks that need to be done to,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the joke online. It's like everyone has an FBI agent, right? Half the country, FBI agents,
Yeah. I don't entirely know. Especially, I mean, if we're thinking, like, again, state, federal,
legislators, executive, anybody that could say, yeah, I work for the state. And I suppose, and heck, that goes into like law enforcement, I suppose they would work for the state.
I don't know. I'll say 20%. I'll go with the same one I did last time. 20%. It's a solid safe number. No, it's probably lower than that. But the U.S. government does it creates a
lot of jobs.
A lot of and are we counting like government contracting too, or
that's even where the vaccine thing kind of gets weird.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that's where because they can't require that federal contractors get, but they can decide we're not going to work with you anymore.
Yeah.
So I suppose since they wouldn't be counted maybe in a vaccine thing, then maybe we don't have to count them either. So not contractors, because that's just people in construction jobs, or I mean anybody who could be hired, right? That's all that is. So I mean, anybody else say, yeah, I work for the state. That's who I'd be curious. 20%.
I'd stick with 15 to 20%.
15 to 20%.
That's what we'll call it.
Which I mean, that still sounds like a lot.
Well, that's a lot of money. Well, who am I kidding? It's government jobs. Those aren't money. I've staked my entire future on paltry change. Right. God, I hope that's not depressing. Sorry if any of you are poli-sci majors.
I'm sure that they know what they're getting into.
No, I it sounds cheesy, but I do think, for me personally, my interest in, government work and potentially, public service is, service. It's something that, this is boring to other people, I'm sure. But, getting to read legislation, getting to kind of, just have a hand in that, and kind of seeing how that affects people's lives is something that I find incredibly interesting, because there's such a small group of people. I know I just said like 15 to 20%, but that's like
sure.
all government workers.
Right.
Now, if we were to count the amount of legislators, even if you were to include state level, state, local, I mean, that's such a small population of people deciding, the success or failure of the people around them.
Right.
For however many decades to come. That's incredible. It's scary. You have to have some amount of, I guess, what's the word? You have to keep that in mind if you're doing that job, because a lot of people could be self-serving, but that, I don't know. It's just something that's, it's kind of, man, I'm blanking on the word. It's humbling, I suppose, or at least it should be.
Yeah. Well, see, I think it's important. It's important to get people. He just shook his head like I have no idea what I just said.
I kind of lost my train of thought.
No, we need people in these jobs that do affect all of us. We need people that are going to handle it responsibly and be humble and not be power hungry. It kind of leads me into a question I thought of a second ago. A lot of elected officials get voted for, or their race gets politicized because of things like court nominations, right? That was kind of a big Trump brag, right? Was that he got to put 3 people on the Supreme Court and tons of other smaller.
Federally, or
a whole bunch of courts, right? Like he appointed a bunch of judges,
district courts, courts of appeals,
right. So, and it's obviously people. That's a big thing that resonates, because we all understand more or less the power of the courts. And, and the if you're on one side or the other, you want those people interpreting the laws, and so that kind of gets politicized, right? The appointment of judges and justices, but. Should we politicize it in the same way of like, hey, these people are also going to be appointing people to agencies that then also appoint people that then appoint people?
Politicizing the appointment of judges, or as in agencies?
Well, I'm saying that
in a similar sense,
the appointment of judges is already politicized.
Yes,
and so I'm saying, should voters kind of consider that also? It's like I think more people maybe need to be reminded that, hey, all these other smaller people, quote unquote, are also going to affect your life. And
well, that's kind of the interesting thing of, I guess you'll remember, I would hope most people would, after the 2020 election, after Biden, his victory was confirmed, there was a solid period of time. I mean, this is for any president, really. And if you're involved in local politics or statewide politics, and it's the same thing with gubernatorial elections. Candidates whether, president-elect, whatever, they will spend a solid period of time, because they have to, trying to fill their cabinet with people. There's always that speculation in the news. It's kind of a similar thing with picking your VP. It's like that's a huge part of the campaign trail. Is I'm going to pick so and so. Well, in the case of President Biden, with the decision to include Vice President Harris on his ticket, that's obviously a huge thing. She'd be the first, well, not only female, but Black and Asian American,
Right.
VP, which is huge. And that, I mean, well, it's good. It's still politicized.
Right.
And, at that point, you're not really trying to sway, Democrat or Republican. It's all about who's in the middle. Because independent voters, and this is true for 2016 especially, those are the ones that decide your election. Very
Right.
rarely are you going to have a large population of, one side or the other kind of shifting views because of, oh, look who they're going to put into office with them.
Right.
Kind of circle back though. I really don't see a harm in politicizing it. If anything, it's probably beneficial because that gives, a lot of undecided voters kind of an opinion of, well, okay, these are more people I can go do research into. Do I agree with their politics? Do I like their policies? Am I going to like how they're, running this agency that, does this and this and this in my life? That is a huge kind of gateway to the soul of an administration, I'd say, especially for undecided voters.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. Those middle aisle people. I don't know what it takes to convince them sometimes, but
some people will just, they don't care.
Yeah.
And to those people, we say, it's okay. I understand. Sometimes it's hard to care. You're working people, and you got a lot going on. Politics is not always the first. It's not always the first thing in your mind, and I get that.
I really thought you were gonna bring down the hammer and
No.
be like everyone should vote, and it was like no, it's
No.
okay. You can. Hey, it's okay.
I don't care if you vote. I mean, I wrote a paper on it. I'm like, well, maybe I do care if you vote. You get such a small population of voters. People that are voting. What is it like? How many people did we have in the last election vote?
Wasn't it like half?
Not even. I don't
No.
think. Well, it might have been. It probably was.
We suppose. I mean, we
It was like 100.
supposedly had the highest turnout, right? Last.
Oh, that was
election.
huge. Because
Yeah.
I mean, you had two, historically unpopular, in the view of the opposing party, candidates.
Yeah.
So obviously that's going to motivate some people, whether they have fully formed opinions or not, to go vote. Because he's blue and he's red. We don't like that. So, and that's
Right.
just a fact of our politics today. That's just kind of, we brought this upon ourselves. There's no apology can fix that. Yeah.
in the I guess the previous two election cycles, really. I mean, presidential is what I'm thinking here.
We're talking 2020 and 2016.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll say 4. I know Trump was in it twice, but 4, sort of 2 rounds of 2 really unpopular people. Do you know what independent turnout was like for that? Because I feel like,
Oh golly.
because like, look, if you're red, you're like, oh, Trump's great, I got to go vote for Trump so that Hillary doesn't win. Or if you're blue, it's like, oh, Trump's the worst, I got to go vote for Hillary so Trump doesn't win, right? Same thing for Biden and versus Trump.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you're in the middle, it's easier to be like, God, these people both suck. I don't want to vote for either of them. And that's even the case when you get some more middle-leaning people that are blue or red.
So I don't know exactly, actually, the amount of, or what percentage of the total vote was, independent voters. But I do remember reading that in the 2020 election, actually, we'll start with 2016. In 2016, I think 43% of independent voters voted for Hillary Clinton. A not so much larger percentage voted for former President Trump. I should refer to her. I should refer to her as former Secretary Clinton. Credit where credit is due.
We're on a last name basis.
Okay. But that flipped in 2020. So President Biden received 53% of the total independent vote, and I would remind listeners that an independent voter is not, oh, I'm center of the aisle.
Right.
It's just
There's not affiliated.
I'm not affiliated with a party.
Right.
But President Biden got, I think, 53% of the vote, and I believe former President Trump received somewhere around that same 43 that.
Sort of the same percentages that just flipped.
That, yes, former Secretary Clinton received. Excuse me, I just burped into the microphone.
It's okay. It won't mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the percentages flipped, and so clearly they have some swaying power.
Incredibly, yes.
And I guess I'm curious though as to I don't expect numbers, but I'm just sort of a thought, like what percentage of, so in 2020, 53% of independent voters wanted to vote for Biden, but what percentage of independent voters wanted to vote at all? That's really because when you have two very polarizing, generally horrible candidates.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, I can say that 99% of this group supported me in this last election, but of a group that's, we'll say 50 million strong, only 10 million of them voted. That's kind of it's the problem with statistics. God, I don't even want to talk about that. You can sit there and make statistics say whatever you want to say. But you're right in saying that there's a very small population of independent voters that actually voted in that election, because, like you said, there are two very unpopular candidates. And I did a paper a couple semesters ago actually about this, about the role of social, or what was it about? I can't even remember what my own paper was about. I guess social and economic inequality and the kind of its impact on partisan polarization at the state and federal level. And it was interesting to me because it has such a, your living situation as an American has such a huge impact. The amount of money you make, your experiences as a person, even religion or the social media that you use. Those play a huge role in how you think, how you process things, how you feel about certain issues, and so when you're constantly being exposed to this stuff, as a person, one of two things happens. You either become kind of energized by it, and you take on a more active role in politics, as a voter, which is good to some degree. I'll touch on that in a second. Or you just become completely despondent. You're like, I don't care what happens. We're here. I'm alive, and that's as good as it gets. You don't care about who's in office, what policies are being passed, and that's kind of the fact of life. But when that happens, more often than not, you're going to get a lot of people who've just become despondent, and they don't care who's in office. And so you'll get a very small portion of the population that actually decides who the elected officials are. And 9 times out of 10, that small population, or I guess you could call them the extremes of both sides, because they're the ones that are really being, energized and moved by these personalities, I should say, to go and vote. Because if we're voting, then that means we have a chance to pass X, Y, and Z policy forever. And again, that kind of comes back to what you were saying earlier about Supreme Court appointments with the president. That was a huge campaign promise for him, was I'm going to get this many people elected or nominated, I should say, confirmed
Mm.
to these court positions, and that he did it. That was the drive.
He did get to deliver. I mean, he really got lucky on that and really got to deliver. But I'm sure luck's part of any of it. And
Oh, yeah.
you get a bad lot, but I don't even think I'm going to try to bring it back to what we started with. That's
I got to be
fine.
honest. I don't remember. I'm just talking. I feel kind of bad.
That's the goal of the podcast.
No, that's true.
That is the goal. This is better. Well, we started off a little awkward, right? People made it this far. They're like, it got better, hopefully. But this is what I'm looking for. Is just conversation about things that you know about and things that you've learned about.
It's my 19-year-old brain with my limited perspective on all things.
Hey, what are we good at as young people other than thinking we're 100% right?
That's true.
You know, do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave people with?
Boy, not really. I mean, think about this. Your life is affected by about 15 people who I myself can't even name.
The political science pre-law cannot name these 15 people.
Not all of them. I can name some of them, but I don't know who the HUD secretary is. Actually, do I know who the HUD secretary is? No, I don't. But yeah, that's just something to kind of think about, you know? Is there all these people, I say all these people, it's a handful, that make your life decisions for you.
Wonderful. But okay, we'll call it there.